What's up, you guys? Ross Sapp, managing editor, Fightful.com, FightfulMMA.com. We also have that additional premium service, FightfulSelect.com. Check that out. But this show is brought to you ad-read free by our new MMA and boxing YouTube channel. The link is in the description below. Almost no matter where you're watching, I have it embedded in the iTunes description, in the YouTube description, all over the place. That is where James Lynch's interviews are now, going up immediately. That's where Carlos Torres' live news updates are, mine as well. This podcast will eventually be there. It is a pro wrestling and boxing specific channel. We spoke about it a bit last week. So head over there, click the subscribe button. We have workout footage all the time. We're having companies that send us workout footage. If Showdown Joe catches Vanderlei Silva and Crazy Horse fighting in the lobby, that will be up there as well. All kinds of stuff. But I am joined by Showdown Joe. Joe, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good, man. I just think James and I are enjoying the fact that we're in Canada. We're in sort of, short sleeves, while you're south of the border in long sleeves.
Yeah, I am. And to be fair, it's a fairly decent day, but I live in a really old house. Got to do the trick-or-treating thing today. Apparently, they moved it. Didn't tell any of the residents. They moved it to today because of weather tomorrow.
Oh, man. All right.
Go figure. James has joined me. James, you've got a new interview up on the new YouTube channel with UFC Moncton's main event star, Anthony Smith.
The man of the weekend, as I said right off the top. Yeah, we were able to get him some really good stuff there, just talking about what's next, because he called for a title shot. So we talked to him about that. And then obviously, the big win over Uzdemir and just the year he's had. It's been pretty crazy ever since losing to Thiago Santos. He's really gone from, a guy that people weren't sure about to potentially a title challenger. But I know we're going to get all into it, but check that out on the channel.
Yeah, we're gonna talk all about that. We don't actually have a ton of topics today, but they are very big topics. Let's go ahead and start with what I think is some of the most interesting news in MMA history, period. Last week, it was reported that the UFC and One Championship, who have been, their presence has emerged a little bit. Like you hear Dana White say in his depositions, like, they're a monster. They are somebody we have to compete with in Asia. We can barely break into Asia. And they orchestrated a trade just a couple weeks after they signed Eddie Alvarez to trade their retired welterweight champion, Ben Askren, to the UFC for Demetrious Mighty Mouse Johnson. Now, we're going to dissect this point by point by point. Joe, how long have you been covering MMA?
1998. Well, we can say 2000. Yeah, 20 years. 20 years.
Have you ever heard a serious discussion about this? Not just spitballing, but a serious discussion of like, hey, maybe we'll send you them. You can send us back this person.
In the grassroots level, there's been times when we'll trade fighters here, but even still back then, you would want to protect your asset if you're spending the money building up the fighter. At this level with the UFC and One, absolutely not. No, I'm still, flabbergasted on. I've done enough research to understand it and just kind of wrap my head around it, but it's just strange.
James, it's a situation that makes a lot of sense, but also you have to wonder, well, what does Demetrious Johnson think of this? What does Ben Askren think of this? They're both ecstatic about it.
Yeah, it was just one of those situations that worked out well for both parties. Johnson really felt like he beat Henry Cejudo in the rematch, so there's no point in doing a trilogy, and he's accomplished everything. I see a lot of people saying, Demetrious Johnson wasn't treated well. Why not let the guy go get paid overseas and just enjoy himself? I think he's going to get a lot more recognition over there where they appreciate the lighter weight classes. And for Ben Askren, we've wanted to see him in the UFC forever, so I think this is just a great move overall for everyone. I think MMA fans win at the end of the day. And as far as trades, I mean, this is definitely the first trade between organization and organization, but wouldn't technically, when the UFC bought Strikeforce, did they not move a couple fighters over? So would that not technically still be a trade there? But I don't know. Either way, it's great to see that, that this worked out for all parties. And I really feel like overall, this is the best for the fans.
I saw a lot of those kind of as loans and just assigning people to your new brand, essentially. But I mean, they owned that entity. That's true, yeah. And they sent some people over, or tried to send a lot of people over for that last show that was just snake bitten and dead. So Demetrious Mighty Mouse Johnson, you'll always have those people that'll say, he never fought any competition. If you take Demetrious Johnson out of that division, you've got probably 4 different flyweight champions. And if you plopped Mighty Mouse down there right after, you would see a Jon Jones-esque run where he's knocking off all these former champions. because he's so good, there weren't other champions. Joe, I, for one, am super excited to watch Demetrious Johnson crush some jobbers in Asia with knees to the head on the ground. I'm stoked.
Yeah,
we're watch him kill people.
You're adding something else to an already near perfect arsenal, if not perfect. I don't know. When I think about it, the more I've got so many different questions in my head. James mentioned how it's a win-win for the fans. I don't know if it's a win-win for Demetrious because he's going to get paid. He's going to get paid boatloads of money, which at the end of the day is what Ben Askren did anyways. At the bottom line is you want a legacy if you're going to be a mixed martial artist or in combat sports, but you also want to get paid. And now Demetrious Johnson is going to get paid. What bothers me is, did the UFC exercise as every single potential promotional option with a guy that many of us will still deem the best in the sport, pound for pound best, right? It's just weird to see that type of talent not being able to be utilized and promoted and marketed efficiently. This guy should have been on every talk show during every one of his title fights beforehand, or at least leading up to it, or at least afterwards, or he could have been promoted in so many different ways. Now, that's not to say that maybe Demetrious Johnson said no to that type of promotion. We don't know that. But at the same time, Sean, you came up with a wonderful idea so many times how to promote this guy and have all these big guys walking into a gym and all tough guys and have Demetrious embarrassing them all. There's so many ways that you could have promoted this guy. To me, it's sad only because, we're not going to be able to see him in the octagon anymore, but we are able to see him under the one banner. It's just going to be a little bit more challenging to watch, but effectively for the mainstream audience, he's pretty much done. They're never going to hear about him again, technically speaking, unless they're hardcore fans and they get online.
James, do you think we've seen the last of Mighty Mouse in the UFC?
Yeah, we have. Absolutely. And just to Joe's point a little bit, I agree with him to a certain degree, but also how many cards does this guy have to headline before fans, connect with him? He had a lot of opportunities and it's not in his personality. It just happens sometimes with fighters. You don't connect. It took McGregor to, bring interest to the 145 division. It took, BJ Penn and Frankie Edgar to give light to the, 155 division. Demetrious just wasn't that guy. And that's fine. It's going to happen sometimes, but I think he did have opportunities. And sometimes the talk show thing doesn't work. Amanda Nunes goes on Ellen. No one cares. She's just the same fighter as, she's fighting Cyborg later this year. I haven't heard a word about that. So I think at the end of the day, to answer your question, by the way, I don't think he comes back. He's going to go over there, hang out with his buddy Matt Hume, fight some guys, get paid well, and right off into the sunset. He has nothing left to prove in the UFC. I think I personally thought he beat Henry Cejudo, and if he feels the same way, then he's done what he had to do. I don't think there was anyone in that flyweight division really that made me say they could beat Demetrious Johnson. So let him get paid.
I look at Demetrious Johnson's legacy as the greatest flyweight of all time. Period. Among the greatest fighters of all time. He's in the consideration. James, he says he's going to fight at 135 pounds at one. What do you think is the mentality behind that? I'm not sure of their roster at 135 or 125 or anything, really. I don't know anybody that exists over there that can give him a run for his money unless they somehow snatch up Horiguchi and he manages to make some leaps that he didn't have when he was younger. What do they got for him?
Not much. And, I think the most disappointing part is that we're never going to see him and Bibiano Fernandez fight. They're friends. They train together all the time. That was the one name that you could sort of, hardcore fans could pick up and say, oh, that would be a fun fight. I think what you'll see happen, I have a hunch that they're going to end up signing some free agents. Someone like Albert Morales, for example, got let go by the UFC. He's at 35. That would be an interesting fight. There's a couple matchups where I think you could bring guys over. Louis Smolka is another guy who just won over the, last weekend. Does he move up to 35 to fight Mighty Mouse? That would be interesting. Or maybe they fight at 125. I think they will go that route. That's what they did with Askren. If you look at a lot of the guys that Askren fought, they were guys brought in on 1-2 fight deals and they ended up fighting him. And, you're not going to get, huge names or anything, but you're going to get, someone that you might recognize or maybe they pull from the international pool, someone we've never heard of, and they bring him in there too. But he'll have some competition, but nothing like he was getting in the UFC.
Joe, is there anybody that you've seen over in Ryzen that may make a good matchup outside of Horiguchi?
Ian McCall would have been one guy, but they've already fought a few times. So
that would be a natural matchup if they could, because Ian McCall says that he's retired.
Yeah,
that's a way to, I think, lure him out. That is That is also a good. I mean, because they went to a draw one time, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, you take a look at the ONE FC roster. I mean, some of the guys that there's Moras, there's Maho Bin. He's 10-4. Danny Kincaid is 10-1. That's not too bad. And then the other real name in there is Yuya Wakamatsu. But
Reese McLaren, maybe they've got a couple people that.
The champ is Estequillo, and he's 11-6, right?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. And at 135, they call that the flyweight division, by the way. At one, it could get really interesting in terms of who, because he's never fought any of those guys, right?
Yeah.
So right there's 4 or 5 fights for him, and he'll be a champion either in his first fight or technically fight for the title in the first fight, if not his second fight. So either way. He's going to have competition, but if all of a sudden an announcement is made, Demetrious Johnson is fighting Getty Estequillo, who, well, happens to be the ONE FC champ, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're looking at here. So, I'm going to be tuning in. We'll see what's going on. I'm sure we're going to be all tuning in when Eddie Alvarez fights. So, 2 good names that ONE FC has picked up from a North American standpoint or an international standpoint. They put on fantastic shows. They got a huge following, so it remains to be seen. But then again, you just lost Ben Askren. But now we've got to figure out what Ben Askren brings to the table for the UFC.
And before about probably August of last year, I would have said Akhmedov, but he's kind of went win-loss over there since then. And you have Reese McLaren, who I mentioned, who's on a 3-fight win streak, has looked very impressive in a couple of those fights, actually. But he actually got beat by Viviano Fernandez. He's been beat by Ben Nguyen. He's been beaten by some of these prominent flyweights already. James, we have to discuss this because through the end of the year, somebody, I think it was Mookie Alexander, put there are only 4 men's flyweight fights booked through the end of the year. And I joked, so they're all booked. The whole division's booked. If you don't have a Demetrious Mighty Mouse Johnson, John Dodson hit the bricks a long time ago. John Lineker couldn't make the weight. Sergio Pettis is gone. Henry Cejudo, there has been no talk of him defending that championship. There's been talk of him competing at bantamweight. If Demetrious Mighty Mouse Johnson was on that roster, I'd say you better keep that division. Without Demetrious Mighty Mouse Johnson, I could take it or leave it. I want to know what you think.
Yeah, it's not looking good, is it? The fact that they haven't announced that, mind you, we should keep in mind as well that it seems like they're not announcing any fights for 2019 yet. I imagine this week, because the card's in New York, we're going to hear a couple of matchups, come to fruition.
New TV deal too, so I mean that could play
exactly
into it.
Yeah. So and I'm sure they're angling for that ESPN card as well. But yeah, as far as the future, I mean, fans just didn't take a liking to it, and it's just one of those things where, like I said, they didn't have a Conor McGregor or someone that brought intrigue to the division. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from the fighters. It just sometimes you need a fighter like that can really capture a division, which is kind of a bummer because that Cejudo and Johnson fight was amazing. It's just one of those things where it's got to resonate. But if I'm a betting man, I don't know if the flyweight division comes about. I mean, here's the thing too: we have to look at how many flyweights have they signed and brought to the UFC recently. The only one I can think of is Shorty Torres. I mean, there aren't a lot of guys that they're bringing in, and there are guys out there who are UFC caliber, in my opinion, that have not got signed. So that makes me think, what are they doing? I tend to think they're going to go away with it, and I think the ones that they do have, they're going to say, hey, you got to fight at 35.
Shorty Torres, who, as Joe has let us know many times, is all too happy to say 135, sure. Well, 170, sure. I don't really care where I fight. I'll fight anybody. I mean, he tried to fight the 145-pound.
Yeah, he wanted to be a champ. So yeah, he'll be I wouldn't say more than happy to move up to 135 pounds, but if need be, he'll do it.
Yeah. So I mean, and the thing is, if they end up getting rid of that division, I would imagine some of these fighters in the UFC flyweight division are going to end up released, or may survey the situation and say, maybe I can make more money in one championship. Maybe I can make more money here and there. Joe, what do you think is the future for the flyweight division?
Not looking good, right? It's definitely not looking good when one of the sport's pound-for-pound best is released by the organization because they have no more use for him. Obviously, you could say he cleaned out the division a few times until he lost that title, but there's a lot of talent in that division, but it just goes to show you that, oh boy, when the only fight the champion is going to be having isn't within the division, but against the champion in a division above, that's a bit of a problem. A lot of the guys in the division, aren't as marketable as guys in bigger divisions. They should be, they can be, but they're not getting that push. I mean, Tim Elliott could be one of those guys you could push nonstop. He's got a great personality. Joseph Benavidez has been off and on. Sergio Pettis is unfortunately gone. He's going up a division. John Moraga, you're probably not going to get much promotion out of him. He's just old school, and he just comes to fight, and that's that. But other than that, I don't see a very good future for this division in the UFC in 2019 and moving forward.
If I were to place my bets, I would say the top 3 opponents for Demetrious Johnson, maybe Hayato Suzuki, a returning Ian McCall, or Joshua Pasio. We haven't even talked about Ben Askren's end of this yet. James, Ben Askren is immediately plopped down into a UFC welterweight division, and there are still a lot of questions about Ben Askren. It's for all the dominating that he's done, and he's got wins over Koreshkov when Koreshkov was a young pup at that. He's got wins over Lyman Good, who is in the UFC fighting this weekend, I believe.
He is, yeah. Fighting Ben Saunders.
Beat Shinya Aoki. He is unbeaten in 19 fights. Although in that Luis Santos fight, things got a little hairy for him. Dana White claims that he's going to face a top 5 fighter right out of the gate. Who do you think he fights?
I think Darren Till's the fight to make. If Till can get down to 170, if he's, I know he's mentioned that he wants to move up to middleweight, but there's been a lot of talk on Twitter. But even take that out of the equation, I think this is the perfect fight because Till, the big question was, did he deserve that title shot? And it certainly didn't look like it in that fight with Woodley. He got completely outclassed. I mean, that was a dominating performance.
Shut out.
Yeah. So on the flip side, Ben Askren, is he really that good? Or is it just that he's fighting less than good competition? And the other win you forgot to mention, big one, was Douglas Lima. That was a big win for Askren at the time too. So let's see who's really of the hype machine. Let's see. I think that fight makes sense for just a variety of reasons because then you have 2 guys that they need to prove themselves, and if one can beat the other, then you know who is better than the other. But saying that, Till is a pretty popular guy. I've seen the numbers on some of his interviews and everything. I don't know if they risk that per se. I've also heard Colby Covington's name thrown around. You don't risk that either. I think you give Covington the title shot, just with the fact that people hate him so much or they love him so much. You got to take advantage of that. So I'd say either Till would be my choice or someone like Robbie Lawler, former champion. That way they can always sell. I mean, Askren, I think at this point potentially could beat Robbie Lawler. And then the way you sell it after is he beat a former UFC champion. I think that's sort of their line of thinking.
The person I don't put him against in this top 5 is Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. That has the makings of being one of the most boring fights ever. Joe, the top 5 is champion Tyron Woodley, and then you have Colby Covington, still listed as interim champion, despite the fact that Dana White claimed that that title would be stripped. It has not been, because if it was, UFC's rankings panel is always made aware of that, or at least the people who update the rankings. You have Teal, Rafael Dos Anjos, Stephen Thompson, Robbie Lawler. Who do you think is the best fit for a Ben Askren debut?
Are Thompson and Lawler not scheduled to fight or not talking about fighting on that ESPN card?
It's not confirmed. Nothing, like there was a report about it, but I like talking to Thompson when we last talked to him. Nothing set in stone. But I think that's the fight they do want. Yeah,
UFC doesn't have it on their official profiles yet, so they reserved the. I mean, look at what they did with Joanna and Shevchenko. They literally pulled a title fight, then put it back. Yeah, I mean, you know the drill.
Yeah, my first choice would be Robbie Lawler. My second choice is not going to be a popular one because some might say it'll be a very boring fight, but I would see excitement in this fight only because you know exactly where a fight's going to go with Ben Askren. It's going to go to the mat. Mm-hmm. So bring on Damian Maia.
I like that fight. I do. I like that fight. It makes sense. He is a number 7 welterweight in the world still. And the thing is, Maia's lost 3 straight fights. Do you put him in there? The thing is, you're never risking anything by putting Damian Maia in this fight. You're maybe making Damian Maia look great. But, I mean, I don't think there's any real risk in this fight. It could always be boring. But James, what do you think about Maia riding a 3-fight?
I've heard that fight too. I don't really like it, to be honest, because then is like what's the upside for Maia really? And Maia's fought other wrestlers. Like it's not. We know how this fight's going to go. We've seen this exact replay of this fight already with Covington and with Usman. So to me, it's like I don't know. For Askren, I think it does very little for him. And I think at this point, Maia. I mean, to be honest, I think Maia deserves better. He's had to take fights on short notice. You know, give him someone else. I realize if he does beat Askren, then that obviously propels him, but I don't see him beating Askren. To me, the catalyst is if you're a good wrestler, you're probably going to beat Damian Maia. He's just a lot slower now. So I would put 2 thumbs down for that, unfortunately.
To go back on that, in terms of Covington and Usman, I think they're far better strikers.
Yes.
In my opinion, they are Ben Askren, right?
I agree with that.
So I think Ben Askren would kind of, do what he does when he does his stand-up, but eventually be like, you know what, we're going to the ground. But I'm going to be very careful with a guy like Damian Maia, despite him being older. But that's why I think it's more of an exciting fight. If we're going to get this fight down to the ground, where Ben Askren knows, and I would argue that Damian Maia would be more than happy to stand and trade with a guy like Ben Askren, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's why I think they'll probably, or they should, book him against a striker. Really test Ben Askren right out of the gate with a guy who is competent on the feet. I mean, as we've seen in the past, Luis Santos had some luck there. But MMA trades, it's wild to even think about. James, did we ever see a UFC Bellator trade?
No, but I do remember, I mean, there was a period of time where, I mean, the UFC was picking up a couple Bellator guys and a couple UFC guys went to Bellator. Like, nothing huge, but I remember, Ben Saunders went to Bellator for a bit from the UFC. And then, Roger Huerta went from the UFC to Bellator. And then I think back the other way, they had, Lombard obviously came over later. I'm just trying to think of other Bellator fighters they brought in. Not a ton, to be honest. You don't see a lot of, and then there's guys that just fought on the prelims that they ended up just lucking out on, Travis Brown and, Chaz Skelly. And there's guys that just fought for Bellator previously, but nothing significant like this. No, I don't think so.
This makes me want an MMA draft where they can trade draft picks and future considerations. And I'm here for the more sport aspects of MMA. And this is a sport aspect of MMA that I really enjoy. I really like that they made this trade. I think it's good for all involved because, quite frankly, Ben Askren wasn't going to fight anymore. He had an office job at one and was all too happy to hit the bricks. Frankie Edgar is injured. He is out of his UFC Denver main event with Korean Zombie. In his place is Yair Rodriguez. Joe, what do you think about this? Frankie Edgar definitely not getting any younger, but Yair Rodriguez and Korean Zombie, that is at least from an in-cage standpoint, that's a hell of a main event. I mean, it's going to deliver.
Yeah, well, all three of those guys are going to put on fantastic fights, right? We saw Edgar completely dominate Yair, but, anytime Yair fights, he's very explosive, very fun, and Korean Zombie is just the Korean Zombie, right? So he's just amazing. So I think we're going to see a good scrap here between these two guys now that the main event has changed. I feel bad for Frankie, obviously, and, being a friend or whatever. It sucks because he's not getting any younger, and the paydays aren't going to be like they were before in terms of frequency. So Frankie's not going to get paid now, which sucks. But and he wants to fight. That dude's got testosterone, boys. Like, you have no idea. He is ready to dance at any time. Mark my words. And I'm talking about even outside the cage. He won't do it, but doesn't take much for Frankie to switch a gear and be like, yeah, really? Okay. So he wanted this fight. He really wanted to compete. Unfortunately, injuries happen and it sucks. But like you said, Sean, he's not getting any younger, and hopefully his body can heal up quick and he can see action soon.
This card, James, isn't that bad. Like, I look at it, and a lot of times I'm looking at these Fox offerings, these Fox Sports 1 offerings that UFC is throwing up, and I'm like, ugh, and they really don't care. But you have Cerrone, Perry, Pennington, and Jermaine Durandamy, assuming that the former, or the latter rather, actually shows up to fight. Benavidez and Borg, those are decent fights. What do you think about this main event? Should they have bumped up Cerrone and Perry, or do you like Korean Zombie and Yair Rodriguez here?
No, this is a perfect fight, in my opinion. And I'll actually kind of play devil's advocate a little bit. I think the UFC dodged a bullet here in a couple scenarios. First off, Yair Rodriguez fighting Zabit when he was supposed to was a stupid idea, because you're essentially killing two prospects, right? And I don't think Yair would have come out on top. And after the beating he took against Frankie, why are you giving him Zabit? It just didn't make any sense to me, especially a guy in Yair who's very talented, very exciting. Also, speaks Spanish, so you have that Latin America market. So to me, the fact that he's fighting Korean Zombie, I like this fight because I think he has a good chance here. Zombie's had a layoff. He hasn't been as active as Yair has. Yair's looking to bounce back after the Edgar fight. I mean, Edgar beat Zombie. That's great. He's probably back into it. But I think we're seeing in the featherweight division a transition anyways between some of the old guard and the new guard. So I think this is a much better fight. And to be honest, I like fight night cards where you see two prospects sort of highlighted in the main event. I wouldn't really consider Zombie a prophet, but it's one of those things where you need to showcase your up and comers. And I think that the spotlight's going to be on them. Look, Cerrone and Perry is a great fight, but I don't think either of them are close to a title shot at this point. Whereas these two guys, I think a win here and maybe another win or another 2 wins really propels them up. And I think the focus on these fight night cards should be on their up-and-comers because they don't do a good enough job promoting them.
I would have much preferred it switched around for Korean Zombie and Yair, and then Zabit and Edgar even. I mean, because Zabit...
same management. I don't think they'll fight.
Man. Unfortunate. Also, making news this week, Jon Jones says that with 2 years of training, he will become I think he said competent, decent boxer. Said that Anthony Joshua would get the best of him. Now, this is a guy who also out-wrestled Daniel Cormier, one of the greatest MMA wrestlers of all time, and quite frankly made it to the UFC in, I think, 8 or 9 months, period. I mean, it was unbelievable. Like, to the point to where when I would read regional results back then, I would think, how many Jon Joneses are there competing in the Northeast? Because I kept seeing his name every single week fighting. He is 30 years old. However, as we know, heavyweights in boxing and MMA tend to last a little bit longer. How do you think that Jon Jones could do with 2 years of boxing training, Joe?
Man, it is so tough to say with Jon Jones because he's such a gifted talent, but it is a different sport. Different footwork, different mentality, different type of style, different type of angles that you have to use. But it is Jon Jones. So with 2 years, yeah, you know what? He'd probably be pretty damn good. You know, I just think it's totally different because in MMA, he's got more freedom to do what he wants to do and get away with a bit more stuff. Boxing, by no means is rigid, but you're limited to what you can do. You can't throw elbows, Johnny. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see. But with 2 years and the type of athlete and sponge that Jon Jones is, I wouldn't be surprised if he does damn well at cruiserweight or at heavyweight.
James, your thoughts?
I agree with Joe here. I'll never forget that story that Brian Stan told on the Joe Rogan Experience, where he basically said that Jon was doing things that, it takes years to teach people, and Jon didn't even, he had not a lot of training as far as his transition to MMA. I think I maintain this. Steroids or not, or whatever, this guy's a special talent. I think he could excel in any sport. I don't think, I think boxing training for 2 years. I think if anyone could do it, it could be Jon, who could look impressive. He has natural gifts, whether it's his movement and other things, and just his build as well too. I think that's something that doesn't get talked about enough, is that he's got such a lanky build for 205 pounds that he's able to get in and use his length and use his reach to his advantage, where some guys have trouble with that. So I think he'd do quite well in boxing. But again, I wouldn't put money on it, but if anyone could do a good job in 2 years, it would be Jon Jones.
Let's talk UFC Moncton. This, outside of a couple of light heavyweight fights, was just a remarkably inconsequential fight card. But those light heavyweight fights do mean a little bit. You had John Vellante defeating Ed Herman, and with Joe, I had talked about how the middleweight division is going to change with retirements and people leaving and suspensions and everything that's going down. I see the UFC light heavyweight division heading this route as well. Jon Jones is coming back. He's not in the rankings yet. Daniel Cormier is going to retire. He's still the champion there. And then you look around and you see some of these other guys. You see Glover Teixeira. How much longer does he have? Well, what's Jimmy Manuwa going to do? Who knows? But then you have the Dom Reyeses of the world emerging. Yeah. You have Ian Cutelaba, who looks very good. You have Anthony Smith, who has taken the UFC's light heavyweight division by storm. You have Misha Serkinov reemerging, getting a nice win. Some of these fights are they're okay. And we even saw Jared Cannonier, as James Lynch spoke to him this week. He is moving down to middleweight. When I heard the Branch fight announced, I assumed it was going to be at light heavyweight, but it's not. We see John Vellante defeat Ed Herman. Misha Serkinov defeated Patrick Cummins. Do either one of these two really do anything for you in the top 10 of the light heavyweight division? Because John Vellante is on the fringe right now, Joe.
Yeah, he's on the fringe for sure.
Misha's top 15, rather, I should say.
Yeah, I think Misha's got more of if he could just get behind some sort of marketing plan, he'd be much more successful. I think him calling out Volkan Ozdemir in that post-fight interview was a genius move because now that Volkan lost, Volkan really doesn't have much. He doesn't have a trump card. He doesn't have anything to bargain with. He may have to take that fight. It's a risk, again, for Misha because, you lost to him once. You cannot afford to lose to him again. And it's riskier for Volkan as well because, well, you already beat this guy. You better beat him again. If you don't, you are in big trouble, right? So it's got an interesting storyline. But of those two guys that you mentioned, John Vellante and Misha Cirkunov, Misha in general, you know, he's got that build. He's got that look. He could be a much more popular fighter. It's just a matter of they got to get some sort of marketing behind him if he's going to be part of the new blood or the influx in this division that's going to take over the guys that are basically on their way out due to Father Time.
James, I see Cirkunov, and he's got 3 wins that I really like. Cutelaba, Krylov, Cummins. Cutelaba young, Krylov and Cummins clearly have giant holes in their game. And when they have given Cirkunov that top 5 opponent, top 10 opponent, he's lost both times. What do you see for the future of Misha Cirkunov?
I think they have to be careful. I actually disagree with Misha's call with Volkan because, you know, he just came off 2 losses. And this was, let's be honest here, a bit of a gimme fight. Patrick Cummins is probably not employed by the UFC, you know, come later this week, you know, just with the amount of losses he's taken. I think he's got to slow roll this a little bit. He just got to a new camp at Extreme Couture. Looked good in the fight. You know, I don't think that performance could have gone better, but I think he needs to be careful about what matchups he's doing. I know he's not a young guy, but, you know, he is a popular guy in Canada. You notice they always put him on the Canadian cards. I think he does sort of resonate with the fans, but, you know, what makes you marketable? Winning fights. And I don't know if a rematch with Volkan would necessarily go his way. I mean, we have to remember that Volkan fight nearly went his way on Saturday against Anthony Smith. So I don't know. I think Misha should be careful. I've seen some people you know, throw some names out there, but give him sort of a mid-tier guy and, you know, get one more win. Let's just really see more of his game. But that fight against Glover, that was really eye-opening for me because he just seemed very lost when he got in certain positions. And I think if he fought sort of the upper echelon guys, even like an Anthony Smith, I think he'd be in a lot of trouble. So I think they need to give him one more fight to kind of, you know, feel things out and then see where he goes.
I would agree with that. I think they'll hang on to Cummins just because he's won 2, lost 2, or he's lost 2, won 2, lost 2. And I think that they kind of, well, his run since then has been like, we owe you one because of the Daniel Cormier fight, essentially.
That's true. Yeah.
And I think they'll hold on to him for that. And his initial run was pretty solid after that when he beat Kingsbury and Shoeface. But I think they'll keep him around just for that. But also, you have Thiago Santos coming into this division as well. And who knows what he's capable of in maybe defeating Manuel, who would have lost 3 in a row then. There are a lot of people in this division that I think are where they shouldn't be. I think that Anthony Smith probably leapfrogs a whole lot of people, but John Vellante has been on the fringe of that top 15. When you have a Jared Cannonier losing his way out of the light heavyweight division and moving to middleweight, that kind of helps you out a little bit. A Santos popping up doesn't help you out a little bit. That was a very close fight against a guy who hadn't been fighting for quite a long time. So I don't think that one did him any favors. However, Anthony Smith definitely did himself some favors on Saturday night. This was a great display of heart from a guy who has had 40 fights, who is physically imposing at 205 pounds, and he's fought at weight classes way lower than this before. But he did what he had to do, Joe. And as he said to James Lynch, he wants a title shot. What did you think of his performance on Saturday night?
I thought his performance was okay. I mean, it wasn't spectacular to the point where it was jaw-dropping. He was fatiguing very quickly. You want a title shot? Man, your cardio better be through the roof. You know, you're talking about an upper echelon fight if you want to get a title shot with either Daniel Cormier or the winner of Jon Jones, Alexander Gustafsson. Your cardio's got to be through the roof. This is a guy, I mean, he did get injured. His leg got messed up. We know that, right? At the same time, he's a scary fighter. He could end a fight at any time. And I think, you know, I know the rankings haven't been updated, guys, and he's still listed at number 10. Hopefully he's, you know, in the right position when these new rankings come out. He is a dangerous fighter. I think right now his only knock seems to be based on this performance here, would either be the cardio, the stamina, and or if it's strictly because of the injury suffered in the fight, then, you know, he doesn't really have an issue. But other than that, this guy is fantastic in my opinion. I think he looks completely different than what he actually is. He's such a nice guy, very candid, very smart, very intelligent, but just doesn't have that look. He's that guy that you see on the street and you're like, that guy looks like a serial killer.
Volkan Ozdemir is not a guy you want to eat a lot of shots from. And Anthony Smith ate an awful lot of them. I spoke about it on the post-show podcast. That was impressive in its own right with the mileage that he has on him. he being Anthony Smith, but he's still just 30 years old, like a pretty fresh 30, turned 30 in July. Rashad Evans and Mauricio Shogun Rua are better wins on paper than they are maybe in execution because of their cage miles, and Rashad Evans retired. But before that, he had lost to Thiago Santos and won 3 fights at middleweight. He's done great. I think he's won 13 of 15. James, what did you get out of the conversation that you had with Anthony Smith this week?
Well, just that obviously he realizes there were areas that he needs to improve on, especially in the early going of that fight. Because, I mean, I'm watching this fight and I'm thinking, oh, man, Volkan's going to finish him. I mean, it certainly looked that way, right? And I think what made this fight so great, and this is why I really enjoyed this fight, this is one of the best comeback fights just in terms of the magnitude of the division, in terms of everything Smith's been through, from getting cut from the UFC the first time to coming back to getting knocked out at middleweight to moving up. Like, this is just a great story. And a guy who's left his family in Nebraska to go train in Colorado at Factory X. So all these sacrifices paying off. But in terms of, what he told me, I mean, it's just sort of the usual stuff, which is, he feels that he deserves a title shot. He has a good point. I mean, he beat the number 2 guy. If we're going by rankings, that should mean something. Now, as far as who's next for the winner of Jones and Gustafsson, it really is up in the air right now. You've got Jan Blachowicz, you've got Dominic Reyes. You've got the Latifi and Anderson fight, so maybe the winner there could potentially get it. But I mean, he makes a strong case because I think really this division is wide open. And yes, he didn't look good early on, but I think the fact of the matter is he got the job done. He finished Volkan Ozdemir. A lot of guys have not been able to do that in his career. He's only got 3 losses, and I believe they're all by stoppage. So this is a good win for him, and I think he realizes, like, he's got to take some time off, obviously, but I think he realizes that, when he's ready, let's say next year or whatever, he could, make those adjustments for the next fight. And he's shooting his shot. I think that's the best way to put it.
In January of 2016, Anthony Smith was not in the UFC. This year alone, in bonus money, $150,000. And for a UFC fighter, that's quite a bit just this year. That's not even factoring in salaries, Reebok, all that extra other stuff. He's getting it done both financially and in the cage. He wants that title shot. I think he deserves it. But if you've got to put it off a little bit, I think that Dom Reyes and Anthony Smith is one hell of a fight. And if you can find a way to add that to that Jon Jones, Alexander Gustafsson card at the end of the year, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you really highlight these 2 guys. Joe, what do you think? Does Anthony Smith deserve the next title shot? I mean, you've got Jones and Gustafsson. You don't know what's happening with the light heavyweight title yet.
Yeah, so the point I wanted to make as well, and you're 100% bang on, only because he needs to be involved in a title eliminator fight or title contender eliminator. Put him up against the next guy that's potentially in line for a title shot, and then have that guy, the winner, take on the winner of Gustafsson and Jon Jones on that same card. I think it'd be absolutely fantastic if they promoted it that way. To me, it's always been MMA promotion, even boxing or combat sports promotion 101. You have a title eliminator or contender eliminator on the same card as the championship title fight. The one thing I do want to mention about, Anthony Smith is, guys, we talk about it all the time. Not all the time, but we talk about it enough, is MMA mileage. There's only a certain amount that the human body is going to withstand and take before the mileage of training mixed martial arts kicks in. And the best of the best fighters can no longer compete because, quite simply put, if you look it up and do a Google search, the trend is 8 years. If you've competed in MMA consistently enough for 8 years, that's when the body starts to shut down, and it doesn't matter what age you started. Jordan. Oh my God, I'm drawing a blank.
Jordan Mean.
Jordan Mean is a guy that comes to mind. Started MMA at a very, very young age. Chris Hordesky started MMA at a very young age. Eventually, these guys who are fantastic, the body just can't handle it anymore. So that's my take on Anthony Smith. Now, he's at the elite level right now. For his sake, give him a title shot. But for the division sake, title eliminator fight.
I'm really, really excited about the new blood at light heavyweight. Now, Thiago Santos is 34. He's about to be 35. But you do have Cutelaba, who is emerging. You do have Dom Reyes. You do have Anthony Smith. So some of these guys have had runs before or tried to have runs before, long careers before, and are now reemerging. And you got Jon Jones coming back. I'm not convinced that Alexander Gustafsson shows up to fight. He's just one of those guys, man. I don't know if he's going to fight until he shows up to fight. You might also have Luke Rockhold in that division. So lots to look forward to at UFC light heavyweight. If I am a Luke Rockhold, I feel like maybe I missed the boat a little bit because you have these new names emerging. And for a while, literally months ago, guys, there were not these names emerging. And it was wide open for a Chris Weidman. It was wide open for a Yoel Romero. It was wide open for a Luke Rockhold to step up and say, give me a title shot. With Reyes and Smith emerging, it's not so wide open anymore. With Jon Jones back, it's not so wide open anymore. So I thought a lot of people kind of missed the boat there, but we'll have plenty of that to talk about on UFC 230, our preview. A reminder, guys, we have a new YouTube channel covering MMA and boxing. The link is in the description below. Please subscribe to that. This preview will actually be isolated and put up in a clip on the new YouTube channel. So we're going to have clips from the shows. We're going to have clips from James's interviews. We will have James's interviews. If I do any, they'll be up there too. Carlos Toros, we're going live all the time on that channel just to talk news updates. We're going to have lots of cool stuff over there. It is important to us that you all subscribe to that channel. With MMA and boxing really coming to the forefront again at the end of 2018, I wanted to give it the highlight that it deserved. And we got UFC 230 tonight, or not tonight, Saturday night rather. This prelim card, from a name value perspective, you do have Lando Venata, who James you spoke to, but outside of living off of that impressive but losing performance of Tony Ferguson, he's got to win here.
Yeah, he does. This to me, I've spoken about this before. I think this is kind of a fight for him to win. Matt Frevola, great guy in the regional scene, had some good wins, but I think there's just, different levels to this. And even Lando mentioned that in the interview. This should be a fight that Lando should win. I think context is important. I've seen a lot of people talk crap on Lando and, say that he's overrated and all this, but you got to look at the competition he faced. I mean, losing to Drakkar Klose, who in my opinion is one of the best prospects in the lightweight division, that's not a bad loss. He's been in certain fights. The one interesting thing here is that he was part of that split with Jackson Wink. So, when Cerrone left, he also left, and Nick Urso, and there's a few other guys that are sort of doing their own thing. So is that going to hurt him in this fight? I'm not sure, but I think this is a winnable fight for him. And I think the UFC knows that Lando's an exciting fighter, and I think this is kind of a fight set up for him to look impressive and to potentially get a finish here. I love Matt Frevola, but I just think Lando's the better fighter here, and I'm picking him to win in this one.
Joe, I have a sentimental connection to Lando Venata. When we started Fightful, one of the first cards that we covered was that Tony Ferguson fight. I mean, if you remember, over the course
of about T-shirts after that. We wanted Lando Venata T-shirts after that.
It was unbelievable, and everybody expected that because he took the fight on short notice at lightweight that he'd be moving to featherweight. That didn't happen. He said, "No, not my style." And that win, or not that win, that performance over Tony Ferguson just continues to get more and more impressive as we see Tony Ferguson, that total psycho, just dominate people and come back and win and have these great fights. But this was one of the first shows that we ever covered for Fightful. We had that insane week and a half where there were like 4 or 5 cards. He's never quite been able to replicate that outside of that amazing wheel kick. And after that wheel kick, we were still on the bandwagon. But the David Teemer, Bobby Green, and Clark Coast fights haven't been exactly, what we expected. Although, if that knee hadn't hit in that Bobby Green fight, he wins that fight. And he did get fight of the night. I feel like Lando Venata, even if he loses here, he's not going to get cut, because I kind of look back at that Patrick Cummins, Daniel Cormier fight, and I'm like, they kind of see that he did a lot for them. And he did way more for the UFC than he was expected to do in that Ferguson fight. So I think he hangs around. But from a relevance perspective, I think he does need to win here, and I think he does need to win impressively.
Oh, I mean, just go back to James's analysis, which was bang on. He has to win this fight. Can Matt pull this off? Of course he can, right? But this is a fight for Lando Venata to showcase his skill set again and remain as part of the roster. Because if he loses this, I see what you're saying, Sean, but he's basically going to be on call. Like, give him an old school pager, you're on call.
Yeah,
that's about it, right? Because you came in with you took that fight with short notice with Tony Ferguson, and it was just an unbelievable fight. You answered back with that wheel kick scrap in Toronto, or wheel kick victory in Toronto, and then you go 1-2 or no 0-2-1 in your next 3 fights. Weird, because you should have had that victory due to the illegal knee. But at the same time, he's got the skill set. I don't even think he belongs on the UFC Fight Pass, to be honest with you. Maybe they don't want to showcase him on Fox they want to screw Fox for whatever reason. But this guy here, I think he should emerge victorious in this fight here. But he has to, or else he's going to be on call. If he does emerge victorious, I don't know how much it does to his stock, guys. But a win will obviously put you in the good books of the UFC, because when you win, you get better fights, better competition, technically speaking.
Speaking of Fight Pass, Brian Kelleher just shortly after defeating Renan Barão, and he lost his last fight on the Fight Pass card against Montel Jackson. This was originally supposed to be Domingo Pilarte, but James, are you surprised to see Kelleher on the Fight Pass prelims?
Not only am I surprised to see him on the prelims, I'm also surprised that he's the underdog on the betting line right now, which I find interesting because Jackson. Yeah, it's I don't know. I have to double check what the line opened as, but as we're speaking right now, Brian Kelleher right now a plus 120 underdog in this fight, which I find interesting because I know he's coming off a loss, just like Jackson is, but. John Lineker, man. John Lineker. This guy beats everyone in the bantamweight division. So, I find that a little surprising. And I think this just speaks to how stacked the main card is. I'm guessing they must be, this is my guess anyways. I think they're really high on this Carl Robertson guy, the middleweight. I think that's why they put his fight with Jack Marshman on the main card. Because otherwise, I think Brian probably would have been on the main card otherwise. Because he's a New York guy too.
Kelleher actually opened up as a minus 185 favorite.
So the line flipped. Interesting. Okay.
Flipped huge to plus 120. So, I don't know where that money's coming from, James and Sean. I mean, is it smart money? I don't think it's smart money. I mean, even
though it's a virtual pick'em, that's one I got 5 on.
Yeah,
right, straight up. I mean, say what you want about Renan Barão, and Renan Barão is a shell of his former self. Brian Kelleher won that fight. There are a few that I got 5 on. That Lyman Good Ben Saunders line.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I don't know how you can put a former Bellator champion at a minus 600, even against Ben Saunders. And I like Ben Saunders, but we'll get to that fight. We also have Shane Burgos against Kurt Hellebuyck, who James or Joe, you know a little bit about, has fought in Titan several times. His Dana White Contender Series and UFC runs haven't exactly went the way that he wanted. And he's got a tall task ahead of him in Shane Burgos, who had some really exciting fights. Won his first 3 in the UFC and is looking to rebound.
Yeah, I mean, Kurt Hellebuyck is a guy that his camp, him and his camp are just A1 people, man. They are just the nicest human beings you can possibly imagine. And so obviously I got a soft spot in my heart for guys like him. So I am going to pick him to emerge victorious, but man, he's going to have his absolute work cut out for him. Shane Burgos, obviously, as we know, is no joke. Despite, he's 10-1. He lost to Calvin Kattar, which is, a fair thing to lose at UFC 220. But other than that, I mean, he was on a 10-0 run. He was undefeated. So it's going to be a lot of work for Kurt, but Kurt has the ability. And he's another guy, unfortunately, that's got MMA mileage. So hopefully Kurt can get past that and emerge victorious. But other than that, he's going to have a tough task on Saturday night.
He is a plus 255 favorite, or underdog rather. Burgos a minus 310 underdog. You also have Adam Wycheck, a minus 230 favorite. Ruggiero a plus 190 underdog. I think I just flipped those on the last fight I mentioned. James, anything else stand out to you on this Fight Pass prelim?
Yes, but first I wanted to mention that Kurt Hellebuyck and Jason Knight are actually in California training at Team Alpha Male, so that might pay off for them. Jason, in our interview with him on Fightful, basically said, he's getting his ass kicked now. He was basically the big fish at his gym, and now he's finally fighting, having training partners that are putting him, on his butt. So I think that's a positive thing. And I agree with you guys. I think the line's pretty crazy on the Hellebuyck fight. At plus 255, there's some value there. But I got to mention to Burgos, I mean, it was less than it was about a year ago, more than a year ago. He finished Charles Rosa. Charles Rosa is a very tough guy to finish, so I put a lot of stock in that win for Burgos as far as that fight goes. But the rest of the prelims, the one I'm actually keeping my eye on, which I think could be potentially fight of the night, Julio Arce and Shaman Moraes. Arce 15-2, already has a pretty good track record in the UFC, getting that win over Daniel Tamer and Dan Ige in his debut. And Moraes, had to fight Zabit short notice. That's never an easy task. That was one of his losses. But I think this is a really even matchup. And, I think the winner is definitely going to get sort of a more notable name after this, because both these guys are young prospects in the flyweight division, or featherweight division, I should say.
Arce a minus 345 favorite. Marias a plus 285 underdog. Somebody's going to make a lot of money on this card because there are a lot of lines. There are a lot of lines that I think are pretty generous. That Ben Saunders plus 450, plus 450 underdog to Lyman Good, a minus 600 favorite. Man, that's a crazy line when you got a Ben Saunders in there, and Ben Saunders has lost 3 of his last 4, but you never know when he can pull off a win like this, James. And Lyman Good has been on quite the impressive streak. He had that split decision loss to Aleksei dos Santos that was a fight of the night, but before that, he had been on a hot streak, a former Bellator champion. How do you see this one going?
I favor Lyman Good in this fight. I don't like the line on this one, like you guys are sort of suggesting. And I do want to mention, we talked about Ben Askren earlier. Go watch that Ben Askren Lyman Good fight. That was a close one. I don't think we've ever seen Ben's face punched up that much in a fight. He had black eyes right after the fight was over when they were putting the belt on him. So Lyman definitely gave him a good beating, pun intended, on that one. But another interesting note I'll just mention: there's a couple teammates on this card. Burgos, Lyman Good, and Julio Arce all train at Tiger Schulman. So one of those momentum things. Maybe if one of the guys loses, keep an eye out for that, because sometimes that can either help or hinder a teammate. Talking to Anthony Smith this week, he said when Court McGee beat Alex Garcia, that was a big boost for him. So just keep stuff like that in mind when you're looking at these fights, because that stuff does play into it. But yes, my pick is Lyman Good.
Also, we have Roxanne Modafferi, former title challenger, facing the woman who didn't show up to the fight, essentially, for that title fight, Sijara Eubanks. This is another big line. Eubanks a minus 475 favorite over the plus 380 Roxanne Modafferi. Joe, given Sijara's trouble making weight and Roxanne's just marked improvement since actually training full-time to be a fighter, I think that line is a little generous, because I don't know how necessarily this fight will go. There are just so many factors that play into this. And obviously, Sijara Eubanks has been on a emotional roller coaster. And this is a fight that went 3 rounds on tough. And it's hard to really put what happens on tough into consideration, considering the physical and emotional roller coaster people go through on that show. What do you think about this fight?
Actually, before I give you my thoughts on that fight, was the Lyman Good Ben Askren fight the one where Lyman's knee almost blew out? Or was that another fight?
Geez, I'd have to go down to memory lane. I think it might have been that fight, actually. Yeah, now that you mention it.
Yeah. It's gonna be interesting to see, because I mean that line's still crazy. But in terms of the Sijara Eubanks Roxanne Modafferi fight, and what goes through my head with these two ladies is that Eubanks potentially is going to just bully her opponent. She's going to bully her and just beat her down for 3 rounds, for 15 minutes, or at least just keep your limbs in check. But at the same time, I think she's going to beat down Roxanne Modafferi. But Modafferi's improvements led me to believe that, you know what, you leave your arm hanging out, I'll take it, I'll break it, I'll take your back. So it's one of those things. And one of the most important things that Sean mentioned, in describing this fight, where's your head at, son or madam? Where's your head at? Because the emotional roller coaster that she's been on, especially, like, you would have to think there's times when she's training or thinking or alone in her own head thinking, I'm disgusted to be fighting for the UFC after what they did to me, gave me a title shot, took it away. It's just the craziness. So if she can keep her head and her thoughts just focused on the fight, she should emerge victorious. But if there's any mental break, and Roxanne Modafferi is just a happy-go-lucky fighter, she'll take advantage of that and choke her out. So it'll be interesting to see. This is one, Sean, James, at plus 380. Put 5 on it for Roxanne. Why not?
We also have Jordan Rinaldi, Jason Knight. Knight a minus 260, Rinaldi a plus 220. Considering how Knight fights, I thought this would be more of a pick'em. But you spoke to Jason Knight recently, James, revealed the length of his UFC contract, was pretty forthcoming about all that stuff.
Yeah, he was, and obviously, he knows there's a lot at stake for this fight. It looks like the UFC is, they're giving him this opportunity here against a guy in Rinaldi who I think he should win. this last fight against Makwan Amirkhani, I think that could have gone either way. Knight is still up there. He's as far as one of the good featherweight fighters. I think, like the Lando Venata matchup, this is a fight that I think is tailor-made for Jason Knight, and I like the fact he's going to Team Alpha Male as well. I mean, if your training's harder than the fight, then that always pays off well. So I feel like this is going to be, I think, a showcase fight for Knight. Rinaldi's good as well. Trains with the Lima brothers in Atlanta. Definitely is a guy that's looking to bounce back. But I think Knight overall, you look at the experience there, I think that's going to pay off in this fight.
Speaking of lines that surprised me based on how people fight, Derek Brunson, a plus 260. Israel Adesanya, a minus 320. Obviously, Israel Adesanya, a highly touted emerging name in the UFC. Derek Brunson can knock you out when he's not fighting like a fool. James, how do you see this fight going? You also talked to Israel this week.
I did, yeah. Israel, no surprise, very confident heading into this fight. And I agree with him here. I mean, if you look at Derek Brunson's wins, they've generally just been by knockout. If he gets, if he fights a guy who's going to sort of come at him, he doesn't seem to do as well. And I think that's what Israel's going to do in this fight. I think the line's right where it needs to be. I think Adesanya's, look, I was a doubter of Adesanya when he fought Tavares. I picked Tavares in that fight. I thought experience, thought it was too much too soon, based after the fight against Vettori. But he proved me wrong. After what he did to Tavares, I think he beats Brunson. I think he uses his striking. I think he'll get the better of the exchanges. As wild as Brunson is, he has to get in there and actually tag Adesanya. And you're talking about a former Glory kickboxer. I don't think it'll be an issue. I think Adesanya puts on either a finish or he gets a really dominant decision. But I see Adesanya getting his hand raised.
Joe, quick prediction for this one from you.
Adesanya will be in the top 5 or number 6 after this fight's done.
We also have Jack Marshman and Carl Roberson. James, you say that UFC tend to like Carl Roberson. You spoke to him as well. He is a minus 270 over Jack Marshman, a plus 230. How do you see this one going?
I like Robertson in this fight. Again, you got to look at the loss in his last fight. Cesar Ferraro, one of the top guys in the middleweight division. He basically just said, I made a mistake. I'm past it. I'm ready to go. The experience clearly goes to Jack Marshman in this fight, but I think Robertson, really fast guy, really knows how to put it together. I think we'll see another highlight reel win from him in this fight.
A Dana White Contender Series product essentially had a very impressive 15-second knockout on that card. So, Joe, they want him to do well so they can say Dana White Contender Series and add him to the highlight reel.
Go Jack Marshman.
So up next, Jared Cannonier takes a fight on short notice against David Branch. Both of these guys have competed at light heavyweight, which led to me to believe that this fight naturally would be at light heavyweight. James, however, Jared Cannonier is moving on to middleweight. He's a plus 325, Branch a minus 400. First off, do you think Cannonier makes the weight?
I think he will. Just talking to him when we did our interview, it sounded to me like just the way he is, like in terms of his eating habits and everything, that the weight's just coming off. I realized that he is a former light heavyweight guy, but he wanted to fight sooner. I mean, that's one thing that I think is getting lost in the narrative leading up to this fight. So his weight was already pretty good. I think he was expecting something because, of course, he had a fight book against Churio, and this fight's sooner than that. So I think he will make the weight. And I got to tell you guys, I think there's value here on Jared Cannonier. A lot of people writing him off. I know Branch has been very impressive. Outside the loss to Rockhold, he gets a win over Santos, gets a win over Jocko. But, Jared Cannonier at plus 325, a guy trains at a good camp at the MMA lab. The losses he's had in the UFC are, Dominic Reyes. That's not a bad loss. That's a great, no one likes to lose.
And light heavyweight.
Exactly. So I think there's value here in Cannonier. And look, the pressure here is on Branch. Branch is from New York. Branch had 2 big fights fall through, not just this one. You're supposed to fight Yoel Romero. That got switched up. Jacare was supposed to fight. Obviously, he's fighting Weidman now. If I'm Cannonier, I got nothing to lose here. I got this on short notice on a huge card. This is a huge opportunity for him. I'm going to pick Branch, but if I'm going to lay any money on this fight, it's going to be on Cannonier, man. 325, I'll take that.
Joe, anything to add to this fight?
If the weight cut is good for Cannonier and he can fight for 15 minutes, I think he'll win 2 rounds to 1.
There you go.
We have Jacare Souza stepping up to fight Chris Weidman. I love this fight. It is a good fight. Either one of these guys can knock the other one out. Either one of these guys can win the fight on the ground. Joe, you've seen a lot of both of these guys. How do you think it goes? We have Weidman as a minus 170, Jacare as a plus 150.
Don't know what to say about either one of these guys heading into this fight here because Jacare Souza's skill set, Father Time, is now beginning to diminish. He's making more mistakes. He's slower. Chris Weidman, we just never really know. I mean, he was the world champion that sort of fell off the way he did. it's very difficult to say, or for me, excuse me, to make a prediction. I think the line is exactly where it needs to be, guys. -170 for Chris, +150 for Sousa.
James, what do you think of this one?
Speaking of Weidman, it sounds like the surgery went well, and all the injuries that he's had. It seems like he's finally, ready to just, see the Chris, see the type of fighter that we saw defeat Calvin Gastelum last year. I favor Weidman in this fight, but you got to be careful with Jacare. Like you guys mentioned, he has knockout power. I mean, his last fight, I think that was a fight that we thought was going to be a lot closer, and he goes out there and he finishes Derek Brunson. I mean, that's impressive. And we talk about the decorated ground game as well. It wasn't that long ago either that Sousa, submitted Gegard Mousasi. I mean, that was a pretty dominant win for him, which was only a few years ago. I'm going to pick Weidman in this fight just because of the power. I think he's got, more power here, but it's two older guys. I mean, Weidman's 34. That's one thing to consider too. Jacare is 38. So it's not like these are spring chicken. But being in New York, co-main event slot, knowing that a title shot is potentially on the line here, I think Weidman will come through and get a finish, maybe in the second round.
Yeah, I'm picking Weidman to win here as well. I think the UFC has to want him to win too. I think Jacare is kind of bulletproof, whereas Weidman is still somewhat close to his title run, and they want him to be able to put him in co-main event spots like this. I see Weidman winning it on the ground, probably with ground and pound, which we have seen the power of real power ground and pound emerge recently, and I've loved it. Main event time, Daniel Cormier, Derek Lewis. A reminder, immediately following UFC 230, we do have a live post-show podcast on this channel. Eventually, they will move to the MMA and boxing channel, so be sure to subscribe to that. Link is in the description below. Derek Lewis, a +500. Cormier, a -700. That type of line scares me for Vegas anytime I see a heavyweight fight, especially at this level. However, Derek Lewis said prior to this fight, "Hell no, I don't want a title shot. My cardio's terrible." Daniel Cormier said, "I don't want to fight at UFC 230. My hand is injured." So from an in-cage standpoint, Derek Lewis has just an outstanding reach advantage. From a statistical point, he is an anomaly in some of the things he can accomplish. I think he has the most ground strikes of any UFC heavyweight or near it. He has like the largest statistical comeback in UFC history against Minikov just recently. But at heavyweight, Cormier has speed and can cover distance that makes up for that lack of reach. And he is a very small heavyweight, or at least from a stature point, that can also play to his benefit. When he takes people down, his small frame, he crashes it down on them in a way that comes almost offensively. And I think that's very special too. Lewis can stop takedowns, but I don't know if he can stop Cormier's level. He instinctively pushes his hips back, pushes their head down, dives in underhooks. This is a guy who stood up, Joe, with Gabriel Gonzaga on his back at one point.
Yeah. Derek Lewis will go flying, courtesy of Daniel Cormier, Air DC. He's going to lift him up. He's going to slam him. He's going to control him, and he's going to go for a choke. He won't get a knockout. I mean, he could, but I don't think he'll be able to knock out Derek Lewis, because Derek Lewis seems to be unknockoutable, and at the same time his hand hurts. So look for a choke here.
One of the underrated things about Daniel Cormier, James, is his clinch game. He pulls his head down in the clinch, or pulls the opponent's head down in the clinch, lands punches, and when they instinctively pull back, even when he cradles them, he'll give away the underhook just to cradle the head. You'll see a situation like Stipe Miocic where he either leaves his legs open or he leaves his head open and eats a short punch that dropped Stipe Miocic. This is a very special thing to have for Daniel Cormier, because if he gets in the clinch range, I think it's real trouble for Derek Lewis.
I agree. The one thing, like Joe mentioned and you guys mentioned, is the hand injury, though. How is that going to impact him in this fight as far as the striking and as far as everything else? I have a feeling this might end up looking like the Anderson Silva fight, where it's just DC wrestling the entire fight. I don't know if he gets to finish, to be honest. I know that sounds crazy. People are going to, I'm sure people are like, what the hell? He's going to finish him, or there's definitely going to be a finish in this fight. But that +700 prop, fight goes the distance, is looking pretty good right now. Because, again, DC just needs to get the win here. There's a lot at stake here. He doesn't want to make any mistakes. The way you win this fight is not by striking with Derek Lewis. It's not even by really trying to take him to the ground, because I think even there, like, I don't know. I think Cormier, if he's smart, he just tries to out-wrestle him. He tries to hold him down there. Knowing that the Brock fight's in the distance there, I think we could see kind of a boring fight. Now, with that said, I think more than likely we'll see a later finish, but I don't think it's going to be a quick win for Daniel Cormier. I think he's got to just wear Derek Lewis out until he absolutely can't do anything else, and then just go in for the kill.
And the thing is, when you wear Derek Lewis out to the point he can't do anything else, he can still knock you out, which is unbelievable. Another thing that I love that Cormier does, when he lands the right hand, he puts his head down so low that his head is almost by your hip, ready for a level change. So he has you thinking right hand level change at the same time or immediately right after. That is very special. Reminder, live post-show podcast Saturday night after UFC 230. Subscribe to that new MMA and boxing channel because we're going to have a ton of content up there as well. James, let the people know where they can follow you on social media.
At Lynch on Sports. And like Sean was saying, a lot of interviews for UFC 230 up on Fightful. Check those out. The big ones, though, Chris Weidman, Israel Adesanya. Just lots of good content here heading into 230. So don't even worry about those other sites. We got you covered over here at Fightful. And be sure to subscribe to the new YouTube channel. That's where you'll find all my interviews and all of our other great content on there. Carlos Toro doing a great job, by the way. Really liking his boxing stuff.
Joe, what do you got going on this week?
Same old, man. Start coaching tonight. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Saturdays, our first game. So I'm excited. It's going to be a crazy Saturday. I got to help a buddy move. Then I got to coach. And then now we got UFC 230. So it's going to be an interesting Saturday. But yeah, I was telling James and Sean off air, I got up at 4:30 this morning. And then James trumps me because he gets up at 5 every day. So I'm going to keep my mouth shut. But I'll tell you this, boys. I'm going to bed early tonight. I'm exhausted.
Follow him at Showdown Joe. Follow me at Sean Ross Sapp. Follow us at Fightful Online and Fightful MMA. Thumbs up, subscribe, tell your friends. We're out.